business in Asia, and you'll notice actually my God, you notice I'm wearing black shoes from Clark's, so this is my trademark. You saw it here first. So it's my delight to invite up onto the stage to discuss this topic Chris Willowan, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of KS Energy, Mike Willowan, Chief Executive of Infinite Studios, and Chenten Yu, Executive Director of Royal Selangor. If I can invite them up to the stage. Thanks very much. Well, it's the first time I've ever had father and son on a panel, so I thought we'd sort of start there, actually. But let's start with the father. This is Asia. We need to be respectful. So just tell me how you established your business, because you were born in Indonesia, you were educated in the UK, you then worked for technology companies in the UK as a steel company, as a professional, as you described. And then you decided to come back to Asia and be an entrepreneur. So just kind of tell us a little bit about how all this happened.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Good morning. I started my business in 1976, I think. And before that, I was working in the UK and also in Singapore. And I see the opportunity that the energy sector is growing. And I see that most of the energy sector, the services are really supplied by Western company, multinational companies. So we see that potential of a local company participating in the energy sector, because a lot of the oil and gas is derived from the area. Mm-hmm. So I see very few. I think even that time Keppel was only just starting shipyard, Sumbawa. So I see the potential that some of the work could be done locally, and that's how I started. But the challenge was tremendous, because everybody thought, just like the branding, everybody thought that if it's energy, it has to be technology, big capitalization, and most of them are done by Western companies. So that was a tough start.
Sure, well, let's talk about that. I mean, how does the little guy, you've got big multinationals who presumably are not very keen on a competitor. You were working for a steel company in the UK, in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And how on earth do you go up against these big multinationals? What did you bring to the party?
I think a couple of things, because the energy really belongs to the country, that's oil and gas. I think we started with the philosophy that at the time, in the 70s, that give the opportunity to the local players for just give the basic services. So I started with basic services to service the rigs that comes into Indonesia, and supplying them just ordinary vegetables, food to the rigs, and then start to learn what's the requirement of the rig. And then they started to order spare parts, and I supplied the spare parts, and then thereafter we started to store their goods. We looked to some area, went to Batam at the time, just near to Singapore, and started to build a storage logistic facility. And from logistic facility, then we started to repair the goods come in.
Yes.
And now we're producing, and we export. We supply most of the requirement in Asia, and also we export all over the world, even to the United States.
So it was a question of gaining a niche foothold and then building.
Yeah, I think what we did is that we have this model that I think is now also, I'm proud to say, is replicated. We go to Vietnam and we convince Petro Vietnam to say that, to joint venture with us and see the potential of having the facility in the country.
Yes.
And employing local people. And now, initially it was very hard to convince them, because they said, look, what happened if your equipment get damaged, whether you have the technology, But now we have proven to them that, that we can supply and manufacture the material for the oil and gas.
Yes.
And, the partnership, we went to Malaysia, Thailand, and, we are now looking into Middle East. We're also having operation in Middle East and Africa. So I think the model is that each country wanted to have, because the natural resources belong to the country, and to have added value in the country, to give opportunity to the local players, to local people, to really get into that.
Right. So is it fair to say you kind of tapped into what had become a national policy to begin to indigenize to some extent?
Yeah, I think it's important. And that was a challenge because, we just celebrated 30 years of my operation on that. And I think the challenge now is sustainability, to make sure that the management, I started with only 2 employees, 2 partners. And now we have worldwide maybe about 30,000 people.
Right.
So all over, from Africa to Europe, to US, and we just recently signed a joint venture in Mexico. So I think the main thing now is how to get sustainability as a challenge. But I think the philosophy is there. For my side, my business, as long everybody needs energy, on the lights, Samsung and all that, producing, everybody needs energy, cars. So I think it's going to be there. The only thing is that how do we make sure that management continues to have the same philosophy, to have a business that makes a difference.
Yeah.
To everybody.
Right at the beginning, I mean, the sort of, I suppose, cliche, the caricature of business in Indonesia and some parts of Southeast Asia would be, it's kind of who you know. I mean, how important were connections? What were your connections with the government at that time?
I think, of course, anywhere in the world, I don't think it's only in Indonesia, David. I think everywhere, the people's side is very important. You can have a good intention, but you don't convey it properly. You might have misunderstanding, and you don't support. But I always feel that it's very important that if you can prove yourself that you make a difference, not only to the contribution to the country or the contribution to the society, I think your business will be sustainable. That's more important.
Yes.
But of course, it's very important to convey this, but not necessary to have a shortcut by having the right connection to gain. I see that itself, that the goal is not only to, of course, the main goal of business is to make money, but that's not all. The goal is everything else. Just like if you play a football, one goal, it's more important than 11 goals. If you have 11 goals and there's no goalkeeper, you're shooting the ball. It's not interesting. So if you have one goal which is done brilliantly, that's more important, I feel.
Right. I'm going to move on to your son in a second, but there was something intriguing on your CV, which is that it said that one of the first things you were supplying to oil rigs was videos. Now, I'm just interested in what people on oil rigs, what kind of videos they watch. You see, I bet it's not Gone with the Wind. So, what kind of...
If you remember 1970s, there's no satellites, there's no wireless television. So the people working in the rigs are getting completely bored. So of course, we used to tape programs from their home, from the US, from Britain, and then I would say rent it out to the crews of the rigs.
I see. So to Dallas and things like that.
Yeah, Dallas and things like that.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, let me move on to Mike. And there is a segue here because we've gone from, oil and gas services industry to, a studio, animation, film. And so how does this happen?
Well, those videos that Dad got, I grew up around them. And they weren't just Dallas, right? They were. I wasn't supposed to watch other things, yeah. But yeah, there was just. You can imagine an oil rigger wanting to actually have more diversity in programming. So there was
diversity in programming, yes, and letting this
yeah,
down.
But I grew up with these videos around the house. My brother and I did, and at a very early age, we became fascinated with the world of movie making.
Yeah.
And Dad also shared a passion for movies, and we always, we didn't see a lot of Dad, and when he did come back, we would spend time watching videos together, and we just kind of appreciated that world, and somehow that stuck with me throughout. And so I've always had that passion for it. And I did film studies in UK, and wanted to have a career in media. But and also Dad, I was very open with Dad. Dad never talked to me about having to join his business or taking any part of that.
So there wasn't the pressure to, as you as a son, to inherit that business?
No, Dad was always very upfront and just said, look, I think you have to first of all want to do what you do. You have to be the best at what you do and enjoy doing it. And if you do it, you need to be committed in doing so. So I think before you even consider joining family business, it's not there just for you to, as a safety net, for you to just kind of play around with. You have to demonstrate that commitment elsewhere if you want to be in that family business. I think Dad's been very open with me about
So he gave you what, seed money to start it out on your own, or how did that work?
Oh, Dad was one of my major investors, actually, yes. So in a way, our family business diversified because when I joined the group, as I did work with Dad, and I do share our business with him in the hospitality business. The hospitality business grew because the business in Batam, the energy business, grew, and we needed to have infrastructure around to service a lot of the visitors that were coming to Batam at that time, and hence the hotels were built. Dad built the hotels in late 80s, 1988, 89, and I grew up with that development, and so I've always been fascinated with the hospitality industry because it was closely aligned with lifestyle and entertainment, and I was always fascinated with that. And so one of the first jobs that I had in coming back to Asia was getting involved with the hospitality business, understanding it as a business, and leveraging on what connections that my father had with other businesses, government, and really understanding how business was done here in Asia. And so we worked together very closely in that before, we started talking about the media business being a very interesting time. It was after the crisis, 1997, 1998. There was a lot of flux here in the region. There wasn't a lot of growth in media yet at that time. There wasn't a lot of opportunity, but we did sense that there was an interesting space to be in. And hence the model of what Dad had done by offshoring parts of production into a hinterland which Singapore never had.
Yes.
And using Singapore as that, tip of the spear for sort of like global outreach. That's what I did for the media business as well, and that's how.
So just tell us concretely. I mean, what when you got into the media business, what did you start? What kind of programs were you making?
Well,
for who?
We invested in a services company, in a digital production company, and it was very strategic because, we just knew that everything is going digital, and digital production, and like energy, everyone needs energy, everyone needs to be entertained. Content is king, and we really believe that, and we invested in a company that specialized in producing content, but not actually owning the content. And so the first things that we did was provide services to TV commercials, and we do all the visual effects and post-production, all the sort of like the visual plastic surgery of the business we did, from television to film. We started an animation company, which grew to become one of the largest animation companies in Southeast Asia, with over 350 artists.
Right. And they're here in Batam.
They're in Batam, that's right.
And they're making things like?
They're making things like Garfield.
Like Garfield.
Yes.
So your conglomerate is pretty broad. It's the gas to Garfield.
Gas to Garfield. That's right. Cats. So we. So not a lot of people. We started the animation business. we've been in that business for a decade now.
Yeah.
And we started out predominantly as a services-based business.
Yes.
And not a lot of people know that today we make everything from Garfield to Franklin and Friends to Peter Rabbit, some very well-known shows that have been shown around the world is made on this little island just off Singapore called Batam, in a studio. So it's it's gone a long way.
Right.
Yeah. So today we're moving into content creation and ownership, as well as exploitation and distribution of that. So we've kind of evolved.
Right. I've got many follow-up questions, but let's bring in Tenyu, who's been very patient. Now, Royal Selangor is an older business than the businesses we've been talking about. And tell us, how old it is, how it started, and how, I think, crucially, it's evolved.
Okay, it's 128 years old this year.
It's about as old as the FT, which is celebrating 125 years.
Yeah. So great-grandfather came from China to settle in Kuala Lumpur in 1885. That's how it started. Most Chinese moving to Southeast Asia in those days were coming to work in tin mines. He was an unusual one who came to make items in pewter because those were his skills. And that progressed in line with development of tin mining in this part of the world because the main raw material for pewter is tin. So the early days, it started off as making items for the Chinese settlers in Kuala Lumpur. And so it was things like altar pieces, teapots and tea caddies. And it's interesting that over the last 128 years, we've kept the material in a way fairly constant. It's still that one thing that we work with that we started 128 years ago, but the product categories have obviously moved on quite a bit. And so today, the things that we sell include wine accessories, personal accessories like cufflinks and pendants, flash drives, and so we're just keeping up with the times, but having that authentic DNA of working with the material that the founders started with 128 years ago. So I think that's been something that we feel very proud of, that we've continued to preserve this heritage. We've kept quite faithful to the craftsmanship focus of the brand, but we're making sure that we innovate to keep the brand relevant.
So this is, in a sense, is the tradition futurism that Bernd was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we're trying to get right. We're trying to get right this appreciation for heritage. And Asia is an interesting place where there's plenty of design inspiration that can come from culture and heritage.
Absolutely.
So that's a very rich source of new design product development for us. But from a branding point of view, it's very important that we don't come across or that we get away from the image of being that traditional brand, and that people see it as a brand that's continuing to stay relevant today. So that whole tussle between tradition and modernity, we see it a lot, and we see it evolving. I think in the past it was quite straightforward. It was our older consumers who were buying things with a bit more of traditional design. Younger consumers were looking at more contemporary living, and you would think that what they were buying would be similar to our customers in London or Melbourne, and with less of an Asian cultural influence. But today I think we've seen a big change there, and increasingly we see our customers proud of their identity, proud of their culture. And so it's contemporary design which incorporates a little bit of inspiration from their cultural identity.
So what are the very modern things you're making in pewter now?
So I think from a category point of view, it is moving into things like personal accessories, cufflinks and flash drives. I think those are examples of keeping relevant with younger consumers. But the best examples I think of incorporating some cultural design inspiration actually still falls into our traditional product categories. We have teapots, which you wouldn't think as a modern product category, but done in very contemporary styles, and it's sometimes just accentuating it with a little bit of a cultural element. For example, we did a collaboration with the National Palace Museum of Taipei, which is a hugely rich source of Chinese art and artifacts. And we took little elements of that and incorporated into quite contemporary designs. And I think we had a seal for the Emperor Qianlong, who lived a long life. He had seals that marked his 70th and 80th birthdays. And those seals were images that we've incorporated into a sort of very square, modern style teapot today. And I think that's a great way for us to commemorate some of our heritage, but in a modern setting.
Yeah, Formula One?
That's interesting. I think we see brand building as an important element of staying relevant in Asia today. It's difficult to sustain strong advertising across multiple markets. China itself has a whole list of different media coming to Southeast Asia. So a lot of the brand building comes from PR projects that we get involved in.
Right.
And so sporting events, I think, are the perfect fit. So this weekend, it's not Formula One, but it's a MotoGP for those who follow sport in KL. There's a LPGA tournament in the Sanggawi LPGA going on as well. Tennis fans, there's a Shanghai Masters going on this weekend. And these are just examples of tournaments where we've designed and made trophies for these events.
Oh, you make trophies, I see.
That's right.
Not tennis rackets, pewter tennis rackets.
Well, that hasn't quite caught on yet, but perhaps eventually.
You're working on it.
But I think these are examples where you get to showcase what we can do in design and what we can do with craftsmanship, and it's the right sort of events for us to be involved in because it just raises the profile of the
Right.
brand.
So you did make the trophies, did you, for F1?
Yes, so we've done 3 F1 races, Malaysia, Singapore, and China. This year we did Malaysia again, and I think these are also good examples where we get a global audience seeing what we can do. And it's interesting, the challenge of course is that each race organizer comes to you and says, I want something unique, or I want something completely different, and that really challenges the design.
Sure. Let me come back to Mike. Just given the discussion so far, what your father was saying about, in a sense, kind of indigenization of business. These are our resources. We should, we should be able to use them ourselves and get employment and benefit from them. And what Chen Yu was saying about, a renewed interest in Asian traditions. I'm just thinking of the cartoons that you're making, there on this island. They tend to be, from what you've said anyway, Western cartoons that you're making, Garfield, etc. Do you have a move to make something Indonesian, to make something Chinese, and push it the other way?
Yes, we certainly do. The aspiration has always been about growing the domestic market and building local content for a local market. The economics of the entertainment industry in this part of the world is obviously very different. We come from a very fragmented marketplace where local content or content is not sold as a higher price because the advertising dollar is not as strong. It's been traditionally driven by Western markets.
Yes.
And so the economics of producing content for a local market is not as easy. One has to rather than selling out front, you have to get a lot of sponsors to kind of cover the cost and so on and so forth. But what we're doing right now is that we're learning a lot of processes in terms of producing top-end shows, learning how stories are crafted, how projects are put together, and we mirror that in sort of we localize that. And so we have
Yes.
produced local content, and the aspiration is to do more.
Yeah, it can be done. In Japan, say Hayao Miyazaki, you're probably familiar with.
That's right.
That's very, very Japanese, and yet it's sort of gone global.
Yes, it has. There is in Indonesia in particular, because we're very focused in looking at Indonesia, growing Indonesia's domestic market, there's been a resurgence, a consciousness about local content. And a lot of brands there are now talking about producing their brand in content form.
Yeah.
And finding ways in how they could both market and entertain audiences at the same time. And one of the very first mediums that they think about is animation. When you have a brand or when you have a product, and how do you create content out of that? And so we've been approached by many brands to find ways in how they're able to entertain their audiences. And rather than looking at it in a very traditional way in terms of advertising on slots on television, well, how do we entertain audiences through YouTube, which YouTube used to be an alternative media platform. Actually today it is the mainstream media platform. And how do we entertain people when they're on the move, and how do we send clips to people's smartphones? It's a completely different distribution pattern now. And so we do have brands that are so conscious about finding ways in how they make themselves relevant to a new emerging middle class. And Indonesia is quite interesting, and we're getting involved in that.
Right. I've got a couple of more questions for the panel, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So if you could think of some questions, that would be great. And my first question really for all three of you, perhaps I could start with Chris, is just about market segmentation. I mean, it may be different in the energy business, but to what extent can you think of Asia, which after all doesn't really exist, it's a sort of European invention. To what extent can you think of Asia as a unit, and to what extent do you have to hone your strategies to the different countries in which you operate?
The energy market where we service have already moved a lot to Asia. Now you see China, East Asia, really propel the growth of the demand of energy. Talking about suddenly the demand of coal, China, Australia coming up, LNG, the gas. So I think Asia will play a big part of it. The next part is, of course, Middle East have already been the source of energy for a long time. Then you have Africa. Then you also have to see the new technology on shale gas, the fracking side, which we are involved also. So all those things, I think from Asia side, we see the competitive advantage of the Asian side, like Mike was saying.
Right.
Certain production of oil and gas equipment could be more competitively made in Asia.
So you can think of Asia as a unit.
Yes.
I mean, you can approach the Vietnamese market, the Chinese market, the Indonesian market, the Singaporean market in the same way.
Yeah. So one of them is the local content. Just to desire of the government, I think it's very important. It's a job creation, and the local resources, be it palm oil, be it coal, as much as possible. I think any government would like to have an added value towards that local economy, to give the people work and so on. So that's very important. I think that's always going to be for a long time. And secondly is that our business, our customers, are actually the government per se, in the sense that they're national oil companies. Okay. So they are really driven by the economics of the government itself to produce more efficiently, to create a difference to the environment that they are in. More HSC, more health, and the services sector to be done locally. So that is an important part, I think, that Asia will grow.
I see.
And the other thing is that whether that competitive advantage can be brought into Europe or can be brought into the Western side, the other way.
I see.
So for example, like we are looking into manufacturing parts of the windmill, for example, for the North Sea in Asia, because of certain dynamics, certain competitive advantage that we have that we can supply.
Where would you seek to manufacture, just out of interest, in China or in Indonesia?
No, Indonesia,
right.
From my place.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we see that the Asia can do.
So, Mike, if I could ask the same question to you, because I suspect your answer is a bit different. I mean, you were talking about the market segmentation, so it's very difficult in a sense for you. I mean, you either have to produce something completely international, or you have to dive into local languages, local cultures.
Yes, it's always the dilemma with content distributors looking at Asia, because you see such a fragmented market.
Sure.
Not only are the economics sometimes can be quite challenging, but also the demographics are quite wide-ranging, but it is coming together. English language content is incredibly acceptable all throughout, Asia right now, and the pervasiveness of sort of like, all the digital platforms like YouTube or Hulu or Amazon, as well as cable networks, coming into home. So, but what we are doing now is a little bit of a hybrid. We're actually producing what we call now as a pan-Asian content.
Right.
So we borrow the best of East and West, and we put that together. And so we take, story elements that could be very Western in its approach, characters, and some know-how, filmmaking. We produce this in our studios in Asia, in Batam, whether it's in Singapore or Batam. And we mix the talent with Asian as well as Western talents.
Yes.
Known Asian, known Western talents. The crews are mixed, and the content is somewhat mixed because it takes place in Asia, but it's an English language. And we've made that, we've made 2 projects like that with HBO.
Right.
And HBO Asia, and they've done very well. And so people are in it for a global audience,
Yeah.
so made in Asia for the world.
Yeah.
And so we take advantage of the cost efficiencies, the best of the talents, but
Yes.
not necessarily focusing on just Asia.
Yeah. Tianyu, the same question for you, but that's just trying to sort of stretch what you do. Presumably that is different in Japan, it's different in...
It's a big challenge. I think from a product category point of view, in China it's tea drinking that's big. When you go to Australia, it's wine drinking that's big. So, the product category focus in different markets really varies so much. From a design point of view, it varies a lot. Of course, if we take something from Chinese culture, it cuts across China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and some of the Chinese communities in Southeast Asia. But we also then go into Southeast Asian cultural elements, Peranakan culture, batik, things that could cut across 2 or 3 markets. So
Yes.
It's just trying to strike that balance where we have to have a core offering of products which will be common across markets. I think that's something people recognize when they go from one country to another. But the real kicker to drive stronger performance in each market will be localizing it from a product category point of view and from a design inspiration point of view. So the constraint is then, as we try to get into new markets, the hurdle is higher. We really have to think about what sort of products we're going to develop, what sort of events we're going to get involved in to build a brand before we really can make that decision.
All right, we've got about 8 minutes left. I'm going to throw it open in a second, but I just wanted to ask you a very quick question, kind of a macro question really, which is, which economy do you think has more influence on your business overall now? The American economy or the Chinese economy?
I think my business in the energy side, I think, is very global. Of course, now you have seen the rising demand in Asia. Just take Indonesia. We used to produce 1.6 million barrels a day. It's now down to 900. So I think there's a demand to make it more efficient, how to increase the production. Same thing in other parts of Asia.
So global. Mike?
For me, definitely the mecca of the entertainment industry is in the US, right? So North American audiences still matter because if content is successful there, then pretty much you get 50% of the world market as well. But China, you could get a $1 billion box office there, but earn 100,000 outside of China. So
the US is still the mecca.
The US is still the strongest market.
Are you worried that it's closed for business?
We are worried it's closed for business, but still people need to be entertained. So we'll find a way. But yes.
And we definitely see a growth in Asia. China in particular is a big driver. Right? We're in 15 cities right now. I think we could be in another 15 cities in the coming years. We're running a parallel push into the culture of gifting in Asia, in China in particular, the rich history and cultural influences. I think there's a lot more scope for us to grow in this part of the world.
Okay, let me throw it up to the audience. I say we've got about 6 minutes, but who has a question?
Yeah, we have from your predecessor, we have a very good sort of relationship, with the South Africa side. We have looked into doing more business there, of course. But we have operation in Nigeria. We do offshore drilling in Nigeria. We look into different parts in Africa. I think Africa is a very big opportunity for us. Definitely we'd like to engage more in that. Yes.
Another question?
Growing in China in the last few years, the whole clampdown on against corruption, I think, certainly dampened the amount of buying for this purpose. So that's clearly affected the market as a whole. From our perspective, this is not a big factor. There's still plenty of scope to grow in China, and I think that across many markets in Asia, even as there are rules put in place on how much you should spend on gifts, I think there's still a very strong culture of gifting as part of society. So, whether you're hosting or whether you're visiting, that's a big element of our business, where people are buying gifts to.
Yeah, I think watchmakers are actually suffering because of this. But
well, or luxury spirits, I think, would have been affected by that too.
Yes. How much of all of your business is predicated on just the rising Asian middle class? I mean, this is something that we hear again and again. How convinced are you by this story? Is this now kind of self-perpetuating? And to what extent is your own success, do you think, tied to this? I suspect the answer will be quite different depending on who answers, but if I could start with you two.
Yeah, I think for us, clearly this would be a big driver of growth for us.
Yeah.
Right now, at our price points in some of our more developed markets, Australia or UK, we reach a wider audience. I think the middle class there can easily afford our items. And here it limits us to a small proportion of the population. And that's why it's so much about gift giving, because you're spending much more on gifts than you would spend on yourself.
So what's the typical price points of your products, just to get an idea?
So the typical price points are about $100.
Yeah.
And it goes up to, I think at the top end, about $1,000 US.
Yeah.
So that's the range. And as the middle class grows in affluence, I think that really widens the scope of the target consumer. So that's clearly going to be driving growth for us.
And how much would a Formula One trophy cost me? I want one on my...
That's a secret. And not for sale, unfortunately.
And if I could ask the same question to Mike.
It definitely is we're so much more conscious about where the market is heading to in the future, and the growth of the middle market, middle class, is definitely fueling the way that content is delivered, actually, the content delivery platform. So in Asia or Southeast Asia, we still have an issue on piracy.
Yep.
And on top of that, there's just so much free content around.
Yes.
You just go on any internet platform and you just don't need to pay for anything. But it's all about the numbers, because more and more people are turning to smartphones. I think in the next 3 years, Indonesia will have probably a 70% market share of smartphones. A much smaller percentage of those people with smartphones will actually use pay or use e-commerce to pay for anything. But it's the numbers that are driving.
Sure.
It's what is interesting.
What was that data point that you made about Indonesia? Then I just want to make sure I understood it. So 17% what?
70, close to 70.
70, I see, of Indonesians.
Yes,
because
gotcha. In the next 3 years we'd have our first and second generation throwaway smartphones that will probably go back to Indonesia to be sold. But the fact is that rich content is going to be a norm in Indonesia on smartphones. And the fact is that these numbers are very interesting for advertisers.
Sure.
And it's the advertisers that would actually pay for the content to be for their
that's
content.
150 million people.
And that's it. And so that's where the monetization is on content. And so we're very conscious about this and conscious about how we're able to develop a stronger business model for the monetization.
Right. And just, in a word, you don't think we've overdone this middle class story? You think it's real? You think it's here to stay?
It's real. It's here to stay. When you go out and when you see, and again, we talked about lifestyle.
Yeah.
The consciousness of lifestyle is so apparent in today's, with the new generation of younger people coming up, and it's not about how much money they earn, it's about the lifestyle they lead sometimes. right? So well, both tie in together anyway.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. Please thank our panel for a very, very esteemed